Hey, welcome into the GPS podcast. Growing Past Sunday is what we're here to do. My name is Garrett Spriggs. I am here with Pastor Doug Spriggs. Pastor Doug, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, we are...
That was succinct and brief, wasn't it?
It was,
Did you like how that was done?
This week's a little more serious, honestly, and so I wanted to kind of just dive right in and get to some things that hopefully will be helpful and beneficial to people. And oftentimes I am very unserious. So I want to kind of get that out of the way initially, and still hopefully have some fun, but also really just give some direction and encouragement with you, Pastor. And I'm hoping we can bring that to the table today, because this week is hopefully the tail end of just a tragedy that's been going on throughout LA with the LA fires. It's January 2025, depending on when you're listening to this. You may know exactly what I'm talking about, but we are hopefully, like I said, at the tail end of this, and it has been horrific. There's been so much damage. There's been life loss, and it's pretty much in where we work in at Grace Fellowship in Duarte. It's basically in our backyard. And, God has really given us some protection and blessed us during this time. And that's no accident. I think he wants to do some great things through the people in this community and show his love to people. But there's a lot of questions of how do we do that? And so we want to maybe help guide you in a direction to get you going and be a light for Christ during this time of tragedy. So I really want to ask you some questions about that. And one of the things that I want to start with out of the gates is one of the biggest questions people have, believers, non-believers, in every deep conversation that I've ever heard is, why does God, if he's a good God, let these kind of tragedies happen? So I just want to see if you had any insight on that.
Yeah, I have some insight. The Bible gives us some insight on that. And there's really two ways to go about that. One is to take a deep dive into doctrine and go throughout Scripture and explain the doctrinal trail that shows the impact of sin on the world and why the world is broken and how God intervenes in that, which is a much longer conversation. It's one of the things we're going to be doing in our worldview class. But for today's purposes, let me just say what everyone already knows. The world is a broken place. And because the world is a broken place, that being related to sin, we have this good and loving God who intervenes in certain ways that are not always the way that we expect him to intervene. So on the one hand, sin leads to brokenness, and there is a God who is a redeemer, who is there to redeem that which is broken. So everything from catastrophes to sicknesses to, babies being born with diseases, all of that stuff goes into that category of why there's pain and evil in the world. But here's what I would say about that in brief. We need to remember who God is. And God is a good God, and our circumstances do not change God. But all of that being said, doesn't do anything to comfort a person who's standing on a curb looking at the smoldering pile of ashes that used to be their house. And so on the one hand, yes, there are some very clear doctrinal, theological ways to address that question. But for today, I'm more interested in how do we comfort people who are going through that kind of grief and pain. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to be sensitive to realize that in a time like this, people don't need a lecture, and people don't always need an explanation. There is no explanation that is going to make that pain go away. What people need is love and an arm around them and someone to pray with, and they need to be pointed toward God. And that's the biggest thing. When we go through these things, and we all go through tragedies, we all go through very hard trials from time to time, when we go through them, we need to turn toward God and not away from God, because God hasn't changed, and he is good and he is loving. So I think for today's discussion, we can sort of leave it there, but let's just remember who God is. The circumstances don't change who God is.
So obviously this is also differently applicable to people in different situations through tragedy. But, there's a lot of people in our congregation who either maybe are someone or know someone who have lost so much through these fires and everything going on, are displaced or still under threat of, I don't know, I'm a bit anxious about what's going to happen in the near future. How do we minister to those people? How do we come alongside those people and help those people in ways that are productive without getting in the way or without just doing nothing? You know, as a believer, as someone who's following Christ, what is our role in this as the people who are neighbors of these people going through it?
Well, this is an extremely dark time for a whole lot of people. Not just the people who lost their homes, obviously them to a greater degree, but we're all struggling emotionally and mentally. People halfway across the country are seeing footage of the burned out neighborhoods, and they're horrified and they want to do something, and how do I help? So I would say this to begin with, especially as followers of Christ, there should be no option for any of us where we do nothing. Mm-hmm. When we're made aware of this kind of suffering and tragedy and need, we need to do something. At a very minimum, all of us are required to pray and to care and to extend love and where we can.
I want to butt in real quick because we say that. I fully agree, first of all, but it sounds like, oh, at the minimum, at least pray. And it sounds like such a cop-out almost. It's so true, though. We need to actually pray. Not only just like, oh, if you can't do anything else, then pray. No, it's like pray first before anything else. Let God lead you to what you need to do next, partially through those prayers, through aligning your heart with the God of all creation, and the Father of the hurting. That's a big part of what will help you go to that next step of how else you can help. And sometimes, practically speaking, that prayer is the biggest thing an individual might be able to do in these circumstances. So I just want to make sure that's clear. And I know that's what you're saying too, but sometimes I know as a listener of that advice, it's so trivial sounding, like, oh, just pray for them, you know, they're hurting, God will take. And that's not what it's meant to be. A lot of what prayer is aligning our hearts with God so that He can then use us in different ways, right?
That's right. And the more we do that, the more we're going to be inspired by God instead of by our own thoughts as to what we might be able to do or how we might be able to act practically. But I will say this, a lot of times, especially as believers, our response to something that we don't know what we could do anything about is say, well, I'll pray. And we don't pray. We don't even pray. We just say we're going to pray. And it's not that we mean to lie about it. We just don't get around to it because it's almost like a trivial comment to say you're going to pray about something. And I see sometimes even myself saying things like, well, I'm praying, but is there anything I can do? Yes, you can pray. Mm-hmm. Praying is doing something. And so we don't have the power to make the changes that need to be made. We talk to the one who does. And so prayer is very important, especially in terms of aligning your heart with God and letting Him inspire you about what else He might have in mind. So number one, I would say pray. And then beyond that, ask the Lord in your prayer, Lord, what am I perhaps uniquely or specifically equipped to do about this? Maybe I can make a financial contribution. Maybe I can volunteer some time. Maybe I can just go and visit somebody, or maybe I could open up my home for somebody who needs a place to stay. Like to actually think that everything that I have belongs to God, and therefore it should be available to Him to do with whatever He wants. So if I've got that guest room in my house, if I've got a card that I can give to somebody who needs it, if I can make a contribution to the Red Cross, if I can go volunteer at a place handing out water and clothing to people who need it, whatever the case might be, it's pretty rare when there's nothing you can do. And so I would encourage us to just be thinking, okay, what is there that I can do? And what I can do might not be the same as what you can do. I need to not judge people who aren't doing what I'm doing, but I also need to not let myself off the hook by saying, well, that doesn't really affect me. How would it be if it was your house? Would you hope that somebody would want to help you? So we need to look for ways to help. And that's one of the neat things that I'm excited about already, is seeing the way so many people in the community have risen up to help.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking as you were saying that is, I've had this weird, I feel like it's not from God, this feeling of guilt at times during this where I feel like, man, I can't physically do a lot of stuff that I would like to be doing right now. I just had surgery not too long ago on my tailbone, and it's really limited me from physical activity. And so when these winds first started and there's trees falling down and things going crazy all over, there were some needs physically of, we need to clear this area. We need to help these people move things. And I would usually try to jump at those opportunities. And yet I'm like, I just had surgery. I'm supposed to be laying down, not doing much. And so I've had this feeling of like, oh man, I feel like I'm useless during this time. But the thing is, what's cool about the body of Christ is God knew when my surgery was going to be. He still can use me in different ways, and he can also help use other people who are able to do these things in these times. And like, one of our other people here at the church, Jordan, he was first to step in and help out with a lot of that stuff that usually I would try and handle. And it's so great to see him be able to do that stuff where I can't physically do it right now. So I wanted to say that because like literally I've kind of dealt with some guilt that I know is not from God, and sometimes it's good to realize, no, you know what? God knows what I'm going through, and he can still use me, and I need to look for other ways than I can be used.
Bingo. We don't throw our hands in the air when we realize there's something we can't do. We say, Lord, what then would you have me do? And that's the thing where really, honestly, we undervalue prayer so much, and we go, okay, if you're literally laying in a recovery room trying to get better and you can't physically do anything, you're in a great position to pray. And so you can do that, or maybe you go, okay, what would you have me do, God? And as the Lord begins to inspire you, you realize, my goodness, you know what? I spend about $5 a day on coffee at Starbucks. What if I didn't have Starbucks this week and I just wrote a check for $35 to the Red Cross? There's something I can do. And number one, we do that because of the need. We do it to glorify God by helping people, loving God, loving people, changing the world. That's why we do it. But one of the side effects of that is that it helps with our own emotional and mental well-being. We handle these things much better when we can get involved and serve in some way, get our eyes off ourselves. There are all of us have something going on. All of us are struggling in some way. And it's very easy, and the enemy would love to get us to just not do anything because we're not needed, we're not useful, we're not good enough. But the truth of the matter is we belong to God. Everything we have belongs to God. And when we begin to look at it that way, he'll begin to make it pretty clear pretty quickly ways that we can help. And realize that when it comes to a tragedy this giant, it's going to take more than a few people to help. And so when we look for opportunities and we make ourselves available to God, he'll begin to make it clear to us what we can do.
So kind of on the other side of the coin, have you seen anything going on during this that is not helping, actively not helping, or maybe we should avoid doing and we might be tempted to do during this time?
I think one of the things is that are talking about it on the news, which is people going into these neighborhoods because they want to see stuff or they're looking for a way to help or something like that when the authorities have said stay out of the way. Mm-hmm. So we need to be thoughtful and unselfish when we think about those kinds of things. But the other thing is not everybody's equipped to do something well, right? Mm. So, for example, the Red Cross is one of the great organizations on the planet, and they do so much good to help so many people, and they're designed to handle disasters. So is it best to have everybody gather at the church and let's load in a bus and go down somewhere and start doing something? Or would it be better for us to find ways to support the Red Cross and see what they have going on? And I think sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to get involved with those who are already equipped to do the things that need to be done. For example, a simple example is I don't go fight the fire there are firefighters who are trained and equipped to do that. And I would be in the way and cause more trouble. So I need to look for ways to come alongside those who are doing what needs to be done and are in a better position to do it than I am.
Yeah, I think too, one of the things to keep in mind is we need to not just think of this as, okay, once these winds are done, once the fires are out, then okay, move on to normal life and just continue praying. Like there's so much destruction in a case like this, especially. People are going to be in need for a very long time and need a lot of help and need assistance, need advice, need ministers to come alongside them and minister to them. And we need to be continuing to look for ways to do that even after this is gone from our immediate thoughts.
When you said that, it occurred to me that the fires in Lahaina, was that 3 years ago now?
Something 2-3 years ago.
The time goes by fast, but the rebuilding has barely begun there. And so it's still going on there. The needs are still huge there. And it's going to be the same situation here. There's literally tens of thousands of homes and buildings that need to be rebuilt or something has to be done. And there's so many people who need a place to stay, and there's so many people who need help with this or that. That doesn't go away in a month when the news cycle changes. So again, this is why prayer is such an important thing. One of the 10 billion reasons why prayer is such an important thing is, as you said, it aligns our heart with God. And He's going to put on our hearts things that we might be able to do and get involved in. There's going to be a huge outpouring of people who are giving their clothes and giving money and volunteering for a day, a month, a week, a month, something like that. But when it's out of the news and we go back to life as normal, those people are not going back to life as normal. And we need to continue to be a source of support. One of the things we're going to try to do as a church is to be in touch with local officials and leaders so that we can say to them, hey, when you hear about a need, when you know about something that we might be able to help with, we really want you to let us know. We may or may not be able to help, but we can certainly pray, and we might be able to organize something to be a practical difference. So that could be 6 months or 2 years from now that we're still doing that.
Yeah. One of the other major things I want to touch on with you here is during these kinds of tragedies, or specifically what we're going through now with these fires, how do we make sure that we are staying on track emotionally, spiritually? It's hard sometimes when you're going through a tragedy, and sometimes you get thrown for a loop so much that you kind of just go into fix-it mode or different things, and we can run ourselves down real quick. How do we make sure that we are firm in being poured into as well as being pouring out?
Yeah. This relates back to what I was saying earlier in the conversation about not trying to grieve apart from God. Our relationship with God is the center of our lives. There's nothing that is more crucial to us than our relationship with God. I'm always, in times like this, reminded of what David wrote in Psalm 23, where he talks about a lot of things about what happens when you follow the Good Shepherd. Things like you get to lie down in green pastures, you get to be led beside quiet waters, you get your soul restored, and all these kind of things. And then he goes, oh yeah, and He leads me through the valley of the shadow of death. So if you walk with God, or if you don't walk with God, either way, there's no avoiding the valley of the shadow of death. The question is not whether you're going to go through hard times. The question is, are you going to take matters into your own hands and try to be your own God when you go through those hard times, or are you going to lean on the Good Shepherd? And so it's so important that we don't ignore the fact that, hey, I might be grieving here. I might be overwhelmed by the darkness of this situation. I might need to see a counselor. I might need to get a friend to pray with. I might need to take a day off and get some rest. But whatever we do, do not do it apart from God. We need to be moving closer to him, because David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. It's the presence of God that makes the difference in those situations. And when I ignore the presence of God and turn my back on him and walk away from him, because it could be because I'm angry at him, it could be because I'm hurt, it could be because I'm so busy dealing with all of the junk I have to deal with because my house burned down. But whatever the case is, if I let distance grow between me and God, it gets more difficult and lasts longer instead of getting easier and being shorter. So we really need to hold God's hand and let us walk us through the valley. I love the fact that he doesn't say, I drop you off in the valley of the shadow of death and that's where you live from now on. No, he says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, there's an opening at the other end of the valley, and we need to be with God the whole way.
Amen. With all the tragedy and everything going on, all we've discussed, do you have any closing thoughts for people to be focusing on as they continue through navigating this hard time?
I would just reemphasize the fact that, number one, you need to be walking with God. Number two, as you press into God, pay attention to what he's putting on your heart. If you feel a certain passion about something, if you feel a certain concern about a certain group or a certain opportunity, don't ignore that. Take a chance that maybe that's God who's communicating to you and guiding you to get involved. And if we all take this weight for the people who can't carry it themselves, it becomes something that can be managed. So don't say to yourself, well, I can only give $5. What difference does that make? You know what? 1 million people give $5. That's $5 million. And so we need to do what we can do, and we should be doing something. But in the meantime, let's just not forget, God is just as good as he was before this happened. God has always been good. He's always going to be good. He's the source of our help.
Yeah, and like I alluded to earlier, God's placed you in your community for a number of reasons. This is one of many reasons to support and care for those around you, especially when they're hurting, and be the light of Christ to them. So that's one thing we can really focus on doing during this time, and hopefully you get a chance to have some reflection and focus on that a little bit yourself. If you have any other questions on this topic, or you want to maybe see how you can help, or if you need help, we have some ways you can get in contact with us through our website, through the Church Center app. There's need help buttons. You can let us know there. You can always email this podcast at growingpastsunday@gmail.com, or click on the button on the Church Center homepage if you have Church Center. That's usually the easiest way to do it. So please let us know. We'd love to help you if needed, or get in contact with those who might need it. So in the meantime, we're praying for you, Los Angeles, and everyone affected by this. And we hope that this can maybe provide you a little bit of comfort and a little bit of direction. So until next time, we will see you. I hope you have a great week.